Welcome to Film and Page. I'm Dominic, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about the 1956 science fiction book, The Stars, My Destination, written by Alfred Bester. So I don't have a physical copy of this book. This is actually an ebook that I just finished reading. So I recently picked up a brand new Kindle, and because my old Kindle was getting really old, it was over 10 years old, so I decided to upgrade to a newer Kindle with the touch screen and the backlit screen and all that kind of stuff. And I bought a bunch of ebooks when I picked up the Kindle and decided that this was going to be the first book I was going to read on my new Kindle. So a little bit about my background with this book. So this is a book that I've been aware of. If you go around, if you run in science fiction circles, you hear Alfred Bester's name out there, and this I've seen this title floating around out there, but I was never really super familiar with it, but I knew it existed. I used to see it pop up in the catalogs of the Science Fiction Book Club, things like that. So I was vaguely aware of it, and I would see some of the science fiction art related to the book pop up in some of the sci-fi art books I have and things like that. But what really put this book on my radar was Doc Sloan's YouTube channel. He'd done some videos about this book, and then he was tweeting about the book on his Twitter feed. So that's what really got me to decide to read the book. That's what really put the book on my radar, was him. So I have to thank him for putting this book in my line of sight. So that's my background with the book. So I'll talk a little bit about the plot. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about the world. I'll explain how the world in which the story takes place is set up. And this will make it a little bit easier if you decide to read this book. So the story takes place in a world that's set in the 25th century. And humanity has spread out and colonized the solar system with advanced rockets. And the solar system is divided up into two factions. You have the outer planets, and you have the inner planets. And the inner planets is made up of Mars, Earth, and Venus. And the outer planets is the asteroid belt, and then the moons of Saturn and Jupiter and things like that. Very similar to The Expanse, actually. Now, the other thing, in this future, humans have evolved telepathically and mentally. So one of the big advancements in human minds is telepathy. So you have people who are telepaths, and then you have some other people who they're not telepaths, but they're called telesends. So they can send thoughts, but they can't receive, and they can't read people's minds, but they can project their own thoughts. So they can communicate kind of like a one-way communication with people. And now the big thing that humans can do in this future is they can use these new mental powers to actually teleport from one location to the next. And they call this jaunting. And there's different levels of jaunting. So people can jaunt 2 miles or 5 miles or kilometers. And I think the max is 1,000 kilometers. I think that's the max anyone can jaunt in this world. And the other thing is this world is heavily influenced and heavily controlled by huge corporations that are very powerful and very old. So they have a lot of dealings, and they influence a lot of the politics and stuff in this world. So this is the setup. This is the setting in which the story takes place. So the story starts off, we're with this character, Gully Foyle. And his spacecraft, the Nomad, has been hit by something. We don't really know what's happened to it, but it's just floating around, and it's damaged, very heavily damaged, just floating out there in space. All the crew is dead. He's the only survivor, and he's kind of surviving. He's in this locker that is filled with air, and he keeps his spacesuit on, and then once his air gets low, he has to leave, go out into the vacuum of space, refill the air canisters, come back, and it's like a very treacherous cycle he's caught in to try to keep himself alive. So while he's doing this, this ship called the Vorga comes across the Nomad's path. So he gets all excited because he thinks he's going to get rescued, and he sets up the SOS systems on the ship, to alert the Vorga that there's survivors here, come help me, things like that. And the Vorga just ignores these things and flies on by. Well, this sets the character of Gully Foyle into an absolute rage. So now he's 100% motivated to survive, just so he can get revenge on the Vorga for leaving him there to die with the wreckage of the Nomad. And now that is where the story really kicks off. And the story is all about Gully Foyle in this just tunnel vision quest to get revenge on the Vorga and its crew, and to find out why they left him there to die. And now this ties into a larger conspiracy that's going on in the solar system, because there were some there was cargo on board the Nomad that nobody knew about, that was very, very sensitive, that these two factions are fighting over. And the cargo has very special and powerful properties that would really change the balance of power with humanity. And these two factions are after it, and so this all kind of ties into this big conspiracy. And so there's a lot of like double cross and cutthroat deals going on in this book that's going on, and this is all interwoven with the story of Gully Foyle in his quest for revenge against the Vorga. So now, if you've read a lot of science fiction, or even if you've watched a lot of science fiction, you'll see that there's a lot of this book's fingerprints on a lot of stuff. And right away, when I read this book, the big one is The Expanse. So the writers of The Expanse had to have read this book. They had to have, because there are a lot of similarities. They must have taken a lot of inspiration from this book. Right off the bat, you have the solar system that is... humanity is spread out into the solar system, and it's divided up into two groups. You have the outer planets, you have the inner planets, just like The Expanse. So there's that right off the bat, that similarity. On top of that, Gully Foyle himself is a character a lot like Amos Burton in The Expanse, where Amos Burton is basically like a psychopath, that they can kind of control him, but he's like this force of nature. He's a very dangerous individual. He doesn't have like the same kind of moral compass the rest of us have. He's just like this wild dog. You just point at things and he just bulldozes his way through it. Where the character of Gully Foyle is a lot like that. Now, the other character in The Expanse that's a lot like Gully Foyle, or there's another obvious inspiration from Gully Foyle, is Clarissa Mao and her implants that she gets in The Expanse. So spoiler alert, the character of Gully Foyle ends up getting implants very similar to the ones that Clarissa Mao has, and they have very similar capabilities. So there's that too. Now the other one, this isn't quite as obvious, but it's the TV show Babylon 5. Because Babylon 5, one of the major things and one of the major parts of the storyline of Babylon 5 is the telepaths from Earth. Earth has telepaths now. And like The Star's My Destination also has telepaths, but the big link there is one of the most powerful telepaths in Babylon 5 in the storyline, that the character of Alfred Bester, and the character of Alfred Bester was named after the author Alfred Bester, and that character was played by Walter Koenig on B5. So there's that obvious link. So you have like Gully Foyle, who's this very brutal, muscle-bound anti-hero that's a lot like Amos Burton, and I'm sure there's more. If you dug through it, there's probably a lot more. You could see it more. Even Cyberpunk, that's another, it's a very, almost like kind of like, you can see a lot of the influences on modern day Cyberpunk stories that came from this one, with these big corporations that are trying to control everything, and the main characters, they're working against them, and things like that. A lot of similarities there as well. So now I'm going to talk about some of the things I liked and some of the things I didn't like. And there could be some spoilers in here. So first of all, some of the things I liked the character of Gully Foyle. But there's a but in there, and I'll get into that later on. There is something about the character I don't like, and I think really hurts the character. It's something the character does in the story. I'll talk about that later on. And that's in my dislikes. But for now, I did like the character of Gully Foyle. He reminded me a lot of Amos Burton, but he also reminded me a lot of Conan the Barbarian. Where he's like Conan the Barbarian in space. So he never tries to think his way out of anything. He just like uses brute force to solve a lot of his problems. Now the character kind of evolves as the story goes on, so he's not as brutish, but he kind of like plows his way through situations. A lot like Conan. And this is something the author of the Conan books, Robert E. Howard, had admitted, saying that he liked writing characters that weren't that smart but had a lot of brute force to them just because they were easier to write. So if the main hero was stuck in some situation, he didn't have to think of some smart way for the hero to get out of it. He could just have his main hero either punch, shoot, or hack his way out of the situation to get out of it. So Gully Foyle is a lot like that. And I liked the abilities he picked up. That is very similar to the ones Clarissa Mao has with the super speed and things like that. And kind of makes me wonder if this was kind of an influence for the Weirding ways in Dune too. I kind of wonder that too. And so there's that. Also, the whole visual gag of the tiger stripes, the tattoos on his face, I thought was a cool idea, especially how they changed throughout the story. I think it would look really cool if this was adapted for a screen. Now, another character I really liked the character of Robin Wensbury. And now in the book, she is a telesend. She can send her thoughts, but she can't read. And she's a very solid character in the book. Now, what's interesting about it, because this book was written in the 1950s, is the character of Robin Wensbury is a black girl in the book. She's black in this, and it's interesting because when you read a lot of the older sci-fi books, a lot of that, it doesn't come up very much, characters like that. Now it's very commonplace, but back then it wasn't. It was rare. And she's just written like any other character in the book, and it's written in a way so that this future is portrayed in a way that race no longer matters. Like, it's not a factor. It has nothing to do with the character. She just happens to be black, but it has no impact on her character at all. But she is a pretty good character. Also, I like the idea of jaunting, how they can jaunt from one place to the next, and how this is like the next step in human evolution. And I was wondering how it was going to play a bigger role in the story than it seemed like it was as I was going through it, but it really does play a huge role in the story once you get towards the end of the book. And what's interesting is how it shapes this future. Because of jaunting, women almost had to go backwards as far as women's rights go. They had to be more protected because now people could just jaunt in and sexually assault women and things like that. So you kind of have that kind of impact on society. It's kind of an interesting thing. And there's other ways it impacts society as well besides that. The other thing I really liked is I really like the ending of the book. I won't get into any specifics about it, but I'll just say that it has almost like this very 2001, very psychedelic style ending to it. That's pretty grand in my opinion, and I thought it was pretty well done. Now I'm going to talk about some of the things I didn't like. Now I'm going to talk about the character of Gully Foyle, because I kind of got a love-hate relationship with that character. So he does a lot of horrible things on his quest to get revenge against the Vorga. And one of the things he does, now I'm going to have to kind of talk around this because of how YouTube censors words and stuff. So he does something really bad to the character of Robin Wensbury. He assaults her. So you get what I'm saying. I can't say the word on YouTube, but you know what I'm talking about, if you can put two and two together. And it happens off camera, it happens or off page. And it happened in a way that I didn't even pick up on it until the characters talked about it again at the end of the book, because it plays a factor in the ending as well. Now, anyone who's watched my channel for any length of time, they know I'm not a politically correct guy. But this kind of thing in a story, I think it's almost like a landmine. If you don't do it very carefully, it could go off, because it always was a very sensitive topic, but it's a very sensitive one today for sure. And the other thing, this is just a personal thing for me, and I think a lot of people will probably agree with me, but if a character is kind of pushing the limits of morality, your protagonist, and you're to the limits that, they're doing a lot of bad stuff, but they're not going past the certain point of morality where you can no longer root for the protagonist. So this kind of crossed the line for me, where it was, once I realized what the main character had done, now it's hard for me to back that character, get behind that character. Another example of this is some years ago, I read a horror book by Bentley Little. Now everyone knows I've read a lot of his books. One of the worst books I've ever read by him is called His Father's Son, and where the character ends up committing a bunch of murders, and it kind of escalates where he murders more and more, but all his murders are kind of justified. And so they are murders, but they don't cross a certain line. It's kind of hard to explain explaining the whole plot of the book. But there comes a certain point where he commits a murder that kind of crosses that line where I could no longer back the character. So the character murders a little girl. Little girl sees him. She's on her swing and she sees him escaping the scene where he had just killed someone else. So he realizes this little girl can point me out to the cops. So she's on her swing. So he runs over, grabs her off her swing, and brutally breaks her neck. So at that point, I could no longer root for this character. So at that point, the character was like dead to me. I couldn't get behind the character. And so this really crossed the line for me, and it didn't ruin the book. I still enjoyed the book, but for me personally, I think it kind of goes too far to the point where you can't, it gets hard, it makes it hard to get behind the character of Gully Foyle after he commits this act to the character of Robin Wednesbury. And there is a reason why the author did it, because he didn't want the character to be portrayed as a hero. He wanted him to be portrayed as this brute monster that kind of evolves. But that's kind of how it kind of took me a little bit out of the story. Never took me out of the story, but made it hard for me to root for the character after that. Kind of that cat came out of the bag, and I didn't pick up on it till almost the very end of the book, because it happened, and then when it did, because the characters talk about what happened, and so I had to kind of think, okay, well, when did that happen? I didn't even pick up on it because it happens off page, and I guess it happens so subtly that I just read past it and didn't even realize that it had happened until the characters talk about it again at the end. So, and then when I think about the story, the more I think about it, the more it kind of ruins the character of Gully Foyle for me. So that's one of the things I didn't like about the story. Now, the other thing I didn't like about the story was the character of Olivia Preston. And she is like Gully Foyle. She's a horrible monster too. But I found it hard to buy into her motivation for doing what she did. Now, she committed these horrible acts because she was born blind and she doesn't have the ability to jaunt. So if you're blind in this society, because you have to be able to see or at least visualize where you're going to jaunt, and if you're blind, you can't do that. So you can't jaunt. So in this world, if you can't jaunt, it would almost be the equivalent, say, if you were paralyzed from the neck down in our world. Nobody wants to have this happen to them. So she's really mad at the world about this, and so and the other thing, I didn't understand her motivation of why she picked out the target to take her wrath out on that she did. That wasn't really clear to me in the book when I read it. And if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. But I'm trying not to reveal too much of the plot here. Now, so there's that. Now, the last thing about this story that I didn't like was how quickly Gully Foyle fell in love with Olivia Preston. I found that kind of a real stretch. He just, as soon as he seen her, he just went head over heels for her, and I found it wasn't really convincing, the love that the two of them kind of had with each other, or how easily he fell in love with her. That kind of stretched my suspension of disbelief there. So those are some of the things I liked, and some of the things I didn't like about the story. So now, if you're a fan of science fiction, especially classic science fiction, this has been hailed as one of the best science fiction books that has ever been written, and it has influenced a lot of other books. So I would definitely, if you're a sci-fi fan, definitely pick it up and read it. This is one of those books I think you should read before you die, along with Frank Herbert's Dune. It's a very interesting book, and you'll see a lot of influences on other science fiction when you read this book. So, very good novel. And I'm going to go on and read some more of Alfred Bester's other books after reading this one. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. I'd like to say thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you all in helping this channel grow. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded.